New NBA Plus Stuff pod in the description. Talked about LeVar Ball and Luke Walton and that whole situation, and then I talked about my favorites as well as not favorite hip-hop albums of 2017. That's in the description. So Nikola Mirotic is getting traded by the Bulls. He wants to be moved. That's been pretty apparent since the whole Bobby Portis thing. Although he and Bobby Portis together have been great on the floor together, so that's ironic. He also wants to get paid a lot for the 2020 season, and the Bulls have Zach LaVine's contract coming up. And I believe Chris Dunn and his money would be affected by that as well. And, you know, Mirotic wants to be moved, so it all just kind of makes sense. It all is pointing to the same thing. And Mirotic is having by far his best season. His three-pointers are going in and then some. A stretch four, who, I mean, everybody would love a player like that. Mirotic, he kind of has some Ryan Anderson in him, where he's got some deep range, so even if the opposing team is playing some okay defense on him, he can just back up a little bit more. He's also shown some abilities off the dribble in terms of pull-up threes. He can make contested shots, and he also has some scoring ability within the three-point line. He's had some pull-up mid-rangers. He's had some post-up opportunities. So Mirotic, he can just get you buckets, basically. So it makes sense that quite a few teams would want him. The team I immediately thought of was the Utah Jazz, because Mirotic and Gobert together, that just seems like such a perfect fit. Gobert, the guy around the basket, rolling to the rim, offensive rebounds, dump-off passes, alley-oops, and then Mirotic spacing the floor from three. It especially works because Utah's offense has been so rough with Gobert and Favors together. So if you take what was Favors and the problems that those two would have, he and Gobert, and you turn that into a guy who shoots like high 30s from three on like 5 or 6 attempts a game, well, suddenly your offense just can become a whole lot better. And I think the other thing that this does, it would also give Utah maybe some better bench scoring, because you'd have Mirotic be the primary scorer off the bench, depending on how you staggered minutes and all that. I think he and Rubio could have a good partnership with pick and rolls and pick and pops, because Rubio, for most of his career, even though he hasn't been able to put the ball in the basket, he's always made his teams better before this season. So I think his playmaking would suit well with Mirotic. I guess the only potential problems could be that there are times when Nico maybe feels himself a little too much when it comes to doing work off the dribble, and if Gobert is chilling around the rim, then that could cause some problems here and there. But I think the positive is outweighing the negative for Mirotic on the Jazz. Now, as far as the move and how it would happen, well, the emergence of Donovan Mitchell makes it to where Utah probably doesn't need Rodney Hood and Alec Burks. I would not mind giving up one of those guys and a first-round pick for Mirotic. I would prefer Burks if I was Utah, because Rodney Hood's shooting really well from three, and Burks has had some injury history. But at the same time, Rodney Hood's on a one-year deal. So maybe you'd move him because you don't want to have to pay him right after acquiring Mirotic, you know? Now, on the flip side, for Chicago, would they really want Rodney Hood? Well, they have Zach LaVine and they have Chris Dunn, and I think that's Hood's thing, right, as being a backcourt player. Could he really play the small forward position? Well, he has the height at 6'7" or 6'8", but he's a pretty slim dude, and I don't know if he could handle dealing with physical small forwards on a nightly basis. Now, it should be said that if Rodney Hood's in the move, I'm pretty sure Utah would have to put Joe Johnson in the trade as well just to make the salaries work, he or Derek Favors, because while Chicago is way under the salary cap, Utah is not, so they couldn't just take on $10 million out of nowhere. I mean, if you're the Bulls, like, is a first-round pick, Rodney Hood and what he can be in the future, and then Joe Johnson's expiring, is that enough? Potentially. I mean, if you were okay with taking guys who are on longer deals, I mean, maybe you take Jerebko and Alec Burks or something. I think a third team may have to get involved here, just because there isn't the obvious name for the Bulls, unless they'd be willing to just take an expiring, and then you could just give them Joe Johnson, and then they let him go after a year, and then they got a first-round pick out of this whole ordeal. Who knows? Another team I want to talk about is the Washington Wizards, who, to me, could really use Mirotic's outside shooting, because the Wizards have not been able to become an elite offensive team. They've always been pretty good, but I think Mirotic in there could do it because of the versatility he provides for you. For one, there is the potential lineup of John Wall, Bradley Beal, Otto Porter, Kelly Oubre, and then Mirotic at center. And there's a shooter everywhere at that point. And I think that starting five, or it wouldn't be starting, but I think that lineup could be really lethal on offense. And then defensively, I don't know if it'd be a disaster just because Mirotic, he's not like that bad on defense. He could get exposed if you put him in a million pick and rolls, but I think you could survive that. And then, Oubre's been really good at the power forward spot for them. But then, even if you weren't going to go with that lineup all the time, it would allow you to just roll with lineups of like Oubre at the 3 and Mirotic at the 4. It'd be a lot of shooting on the floor for the Wizards, and they've had problems with their bench, so just getting another guy who could be something for them, that could be good. As far as the move, I mean, if you're the Wizards, ideally you would just move Mahimi in a first, because that would make the money work, and you turn a guy who's making a lot of money that you're not really using into a guy you could use. I have to imagine the Bulls would not be ecstatic about taking Mahimi's contract, but at the same time, given that they're a team that shouldn't be too concerned with free agency just because of how bad they are, maybe they'd be willing to take on his money if they got the first round pick out of it. I mean, Robin Lopez's contract is up after next season, so they would get a lot of that money back, but I can always understand why a team would not want to take on a bad multi-year contract, no matter how good or not good you are as a team. Now, there's also the Pistons, who have been searching for a guy like Mirotic for a while. I think they took on John Lohr, hoping that he could be that, and Lohr's shooting just hasn't really been that good since they acquired him. Not a bad mid-range shooter, and he can make some athletic plays sometimes because he's a power forward who can move a bit. But I think just having a knockdown shooter could be more beneficial for them than what John Lohr gives them. I don't think Mirotic would necessarily start because Tobias Harris at power forward to me is still when he's at his best, and I wouldn't really want to move Harris to the 3. So maybe Mirotic would come off the bench, or maybe you would just put Harris at 3 and Mirotic at 4. I don't really know, but similar to Washington, this would give you a lot of versatility as well, because between mainly Harris and Mirotic, a couple of forwards who can play both spots. Potentially Reggie Bullock can play maybe small ball 4. He's 6'7", 205. I don't know. But he's been really good for them since he's been in there. Stanley Johnson can move around a little bit for positions. So some good things there. And then, of course, Drummond rebounding around the rim and Mirotic at the 4. It all makes sense. But what's the move? Well, the Pistons have themselves a couple of longer contracts that I'm sure they'd want to get out of. Number one being John Lohr. Would the Bulls accept Lohr's 3-year contract if they got a first-round pick? I don't know. I have to assume Chicago wants a first out of this. It then just becomes a matter of what else are you willing to take? Are you willing to take on a Mahimi or a John Lohr? Or are you just saying no to all that stuff? I don't know. It should also be noted with the Pistons, Avery Bradley's contract is up after this season. I'm sure they want to re-sign him, so that is another reason why you would want to move one of these longer contracts. But the other thing with the Pistons is their lineups have been so weird this season to where their second unit guys have been better than their starters a lot of the time. So having another guy who can just play with the starters some and play with the second unit some, that could be good. Maybe you move Langston Galloway. That would mean that you trust Luke Kennard, which, to be fair, Kennard's shooting over 40% from 3 on over 2 attempts a game. So if you think he's ready for that, then, Galloway can be in there for salary's sake. So I don't know. Based on just some of the teams I'm talking about and some of the stuff I've looked at, I don't know if the Bulls can really get a first-round pick and a player to be excited about. It seems to be you're either going to get one or the other, which you could make the argument that Mirotic is about that good. I don't think he should warrant more than that because, he's finally been balling out 4 years into his career, and it's been, 15, 20 games for him, so I've also seen the Blazers. I think this makes sense because these guys are desperate for some offense as they've been one of the worst offensive teams and one of the best defensive ones in the league. But what do you give up? You're not giving up Aminu because you need his defense and the fact that he's actually making outside jumpers. Mo Harkless and Myers Leonard are both on contracts that end after 2020, so it's the same narrative once again. Are the Bulls going to be willing to take a longer contract guy if you give him a first-round pick? Maybe one of the teams here would be willing to give Chicago a couple of second-round picks as well. Maybe one unprotected first and then a protected one. It's going to be interesting to see here. But I do think one team is going to budge a little bit more because I think Mirotic's offensive value is real. He could really help out a lot of teams. Give you versatility, give you that shooting up front, so yeah, my gut reaction, or my gut feeling, I think he's going to end up in Utah. It seems like the Jazz are just that determined. It seems like they're the ones kind of leading this thing, and in terms of the players, they do have a little bit more wiggle room than everybody else, mainly because of the two young shooting guards, so we'll see what happens. But that's going to do it, and once again, new podcast in the description. LeVar Ball, Luke Walton, and a whole bunch of rap albums from 2017.